Hey, what's up? It's Jared with Ditch Auto, and today I wanted to talk about the Sony a7R IV recently announced. And the reason I'm making a video is for a couple of reasons, and I normally don't do these initial impression videos. I like to get my hands on the equipment first and talk about it. I've been doing these first shot videos where I actually do a video after having used the camera for a little while, show you my first shots and give you my initial impressions, because this is just an opinion piece at this point. But the reason that I wanted to talk about it is because there's still no A7S III, and we already have the A7R IV, which is kind of interesting. But also there's been some improvements that I think are really interesting about the A7R IV. And I wanted to kind of talk about who this might be for and who it's not for. And then of course, there's links down in the description below so that you can check out the product and make your own conclusions based on the specs and basically the same information that I have. But here are the things that I think are unique and interesting about the camera. Number one is the improvement over the form and functionality of the camera. Now, we saw a change to the actual physical appearance of the camera, its ergonomics and everything a couple of versions ago. They started beefing the camera up a little bit, giving us something to hold on to, which I found to be a very welcomed addition. Even though I switched, one of the reasons that I switched was the size of the cameras being lightweight and all that good stuff. I do like the fact that the camera has a little bit to it and that there's more now to hold on to. But with the A7R IV, we're getting some improvements to the buttons and just the way that they feel. Now, I utilize the buttons an awful lot. Even though the A7R line of cameras have fantastic autofocus and eye autofocus came out a little while ago, I don't utilize eye autofocus most of the time because most of the time it does a great job of tacking onto an eye, but it doesn't necessarily get exactly what I want, especially if there's multiple people in the scene. And so I utilize selected point focus, and I move that point around either by tapping on the back of the display or using that kind of joystick controller on the back. Now, from what it looks like, there's been an improvement to that, and maybe it's going to be a little bit easier to use because it's not so much like a joystick. And I think that that's going to be welcomed because I'm going to be able to more finer tune where that selected point focus is. And I've also noticed other improvements to buttons to make them a little bit easier to find without actually looking at them. Those I just can't wait to get my hands on the camera so that I can get a feel for them. Now, moving along, I noticed that there is a change to the port doors or the port covers on the camera. Now, one of the things that I've just absolutely loathed about all of the Sony cameras so far has been the way that the port doors get out of the way, or the port covers. That port cover kind of flopping around and hanging there gets in the way of other ports, and so if you utilize a lot of those ports for an external microphone, to record to an external device like your Ninja 5, like I have set on top of my camera right now from Atomos. Maybe you have a USB-C for charging. You've got a lot of things going into those ports, and those cables are all kind of wadded up there, and the doors are in the way. And if you utilize something like a cage for your camera, aluminum cage, just to kind of add some more support to your camera, those doors become even more problematic to the point where most people just take them out completely. But then that leaves those ports open to dust and other things getting into them when your camera is in the bag or in the carrying case. And I prefer to, of course, keep those closed. So the port doors look substantially improved, and I'm really excited about that. But I mean, those things are things that are nice, but is it really worth upgrading? Now, the things that I think are going to be worth the upgrade for me is the improvement in the resolution. Of course, this is now a 61 megapixel, which is getting us really close to that 10,000 pixel width on the image. And the reason that I ended up getting rid of my A7R III is because the A7R III didn't do that much more for me than the A7 III was doing. The A7 III came out, and I thought it was a fantastic camera, and in my opinion, I would rather have two A7 IIIs than have an A7R III. Now, of course, two A7 IIIs is still more money than an A7R III, but that was just my justification, and what I actually ended up doing was getting the A7R or the A7 III and an A6400, and that was a great combination because the difference in the resolution between the A7 III and the A7R III wasn't so substantial that it really made much of a difference for me. But now that we're reaching near 10,000 pixels on the longest edge of our image, that is something to really consider because that is a high resolution image, a very high resolution. And though for most people in most use cases it's going to be more resolution than you need, where it's going to really come into being useful is the fact that you can crop in so much on an image like that. Now, there are some examples of people having done that already, and I can't wait to test it out for myself. But being able to shoot such a high resolution image and crop in was really the only reason why I needed an A7R III in the first place. But the fact that the A7 III and the A7R III were so close together in that resolution, it didn't really make that much of a difference to me. But now with the added resolution, I think it really does make a difference, and I can't wait to try it out. I've only at one time had a camera that has that higher resolution, and it wasn't quite that high, but I'm pretty excited to have that extra resolution. Of course, it still shoots 4K. It doesn't get 4K 60 frames per second, but I didn't expect it to. They're probably saving that for the A7 III. The A7S III, and so 4K resolution is always going to be great. There seems to be some improvement to the autofocus system, which will be great. Any improvement to autofocus is welcome to me. Even though I'm not utilizing eye autofocus, I still need autofocus to do its job and make sure it's maintaining focus on whatever subject that is, and also that it's obtaining that autofocus quickly. That's extremely important to me. So that's a feature that is obviously something that's improved, and I can't wait to see how much better it improves compared to the A7 IIIs that I'm using now. And of course, I still remember pretty much how well it performed with my A7R III that I had in the past. So the camera, of course, still has that stabilized sensor that they brought out a version or two ago with both cameras. The stabilized sensor has definitely been an added benefit for me because most of the lenses that I use do not have stabilization. Most of our zooms, our smaller zooms and our smaller prime lenses do not have any form of stabilization. So having that stabilized sensor definitely helps. However, there's a thing to be said for electronic stabilization getting better with other cameras. I've spent a lot of time with the Canon EOS R lately, which has electronic stabilization, and I do feel that the electronic stabilization in some instances can be better than the sensor-based stabilization. Haven't done really too much scientific testing there between the two, but it's definitely something that I noticed. So I'm really excited about that high resolution, about that fast autofocus, the changes to the kind of body and design. There is a new grip coming out, a new camera grip, so I'm hoping that it, and I don't know for sure, I haven't looked into this as to whether or not I can still use my same grip that I had before, but it sounds like there's some changes and a new grip is coming out, which is kind of a bummer because I did just last year, or 2 years ago I guess now, invest in the battery grip for my A7R III that of course also works on the A7 III, so I'm hoping that that doesn't result in me having to get another one. But it may, and that's just something that happens. Now, there are a couple of other accessories that are coming out, and then I want to talk a little bit about my overall thoughts. So there's a couple of accessories also coming out. There's a camera mount digital shotgun microphone that is kind of a small compact microphone that's designed for the Sony a7R IV. So I don't know what that means as far as other units, but what's neat about it is that because of the hot shoe being that multi-purpose, multi-function hot shoe, this is just going to plug right in, no cables needed, and you're going to have that shotgun style audio, which I think is going to be great. Most of us have to put a mic on our camera, run that audio cord, and the audio cord is always kind of in the way, and it's a pain in the butt. This is something that's just going to slot right in and be good to go, which I think is also pretty awesome. And then they also have their dual channel XLR audio adapter kit, which also slots right in, but then you're able to use those more high-end shotgun microphones. I have like the Rode NTG2, excellent microphone that I'd be able to use with this setup. And so you'd be able to just utilize that, phantom power it off the camera, which I think is great. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's going to allow support for 2 XLR inputs, which means you could do a shotgun, and you can also do like your Rode Link or something like that on it, or have some other sort of input, or you can even have 2 XLR inputs coming from like soundboard audio or from other wireless devices. I think that's pretty great. Then, of course, there's the Sony VG-C4EM vertical grip that's for the Alpha A7 IV cameras. It holds 2 of those MP-FC100 batteries, and it looks like that is going to be the camera grip that we're going to have to buy. So for those of us that already have a camera grip or vertical grip for our A7 III, A7R3, it looks like we probably are going to have to upgrade and get that that next level one, which is what it is. You know, it just is what it is. Gone are the days where our accessories last us for multiple versions of our cameras. But we'll see. Maybe the A7S III or maybe the A7 IV will utilize the same grip, which will give us a little bit more bang for our buck, I guess you can say. So on to my thoughts about this release. Of course, I think it's the appropriate time. I thought the camera would probably be released last fall with the typical cycle of their camera releases, but they're waiting until this fall. Of course, pre-orders are starting now, but the camera isn't going to ship until sometime in September. And depending on how early you jump on that pre-order, it may not ship until October or November, because Sony is notorious for kind of running out of stock or not having enough stock to supply the demand. So I definitely recommend, if you're thinking about this camera, to click on the link below and make your purchase, make your pre-order purchase now, to make sure you lock in getting a camera sooner than later. Now, on to my thoughts about the A7R IV and even, I guess, the A7R line of cameras. Now, that camera is primarily geared towards those of you that are shooting photos. Of course, it shoots great 4K video, and I've shot a ton of 4K video on A7R, A7R2, A7R3, and the A7R IV when I get it. But it's primarily geared towards those that are shooting photos because of that high resolution 61 megapixel. So depending on what you're shooting, you may or may not need that additional resolution. Now, if you're more of just shooting for fun, you're an occasional shooter who maybe does a job here and there, you might not necessarily need that extra resolution. The A7 III or even the hopefully probably coming A7 IV would be a great camera for you, and it's definitely going to be lower priced. But the A7R line of cameras are for those of you that want that higher resolution. If you're shooting landscapes or you are a wildlife photographer, you're definitely going to want this camera because you're going to get that extra resolution, and when you're not as close to whatever action you're wanting, you're going to have that ability to crop in quite a bit. You sports photographers as well are going to like that included resolution or that additional resolution. For people who don't need that, maybe you shoot more video, and when you are shooting photos, you don't have the restrictions of having to be back far. You don't need that large image. Maybe you're not printing super high resolution, which really even the A7 III's output resolution is high enough for very high resolution prints. But if you're not necessarily needing that 61 megapixels, there's no sense in paying for that extra performance when the A7 line of cameras is going to be just fine for you. However, if you are primarily shooting video, the A7R line is really not necessarily something that I would consider. I would consider even going and getting an A7S II right now, even though that camera has been out for a very long time, and it will soon be upgraded to the A7S III, or maybe they'll just jump to the 4, I don't really know. But that A7S line of cameras is best suited for video shooting, and sooner or later they will be upgrading that. Sony has been kind of trickling out stuff in weird time frames lately, and so I'm sure it will probably be coming sometime before the end of this year. And this year is more than half over already. So with that said, I think that Sony has really differentiated themselves and put certain cameras for each individual type of user. But one camera that I really want to talk about that I know has to be coming out soon is a next version of the A9. Now, the A9 is an absolutely fantastic camera. The only thing that I didn't like about the A9 was there were no picture profiles for shooting video, which meant it wasn't something that I could use as my daily shooter, because I need those picture profiles for filming videos like this. And also when I do professional jobs, I need those picture profiles. But the A9 is absolutely fantastic for people shooting photos who need that high-speed functionality of that camera, the zero blackout when shooting photos. I mean, there's just a lot of really good things about the A9. It's a fantastic camera, and there really needs to be an A9 version 2 coming out. Earlier this year, they released the new firmware that gave it eye autofocus and a few other features that were really like great upgrades, and they could have sold a new camera with those upgrades, but they didn't do that. They gave us a really good beefy firmware upgrade, but it's about due time that an A9 version 2, or maybe even when the A9 first came out, I said, you know what, I could see Sony doing an A9S and an A9R, because they have those versions for the A7, and it would make sense for them to have those at the higher level for the A9 cameras. But I do think that it's time probably for them to do an A9 Mark II, and then probably if they're really going to take like video serious with this form factor, with the mirrorless camera form factor, they're probably going to go with an A9S or maybe even an A9R for that really high resolution shooter, because even the A9's like base resolution is not, it's not as high as the A7R4 now, and so that lower resolution might be an issue for some people and might actually make you decide to go with an A7R4 over an A9. But hopefully they'll come out with a higher resolution A9 in the near future. But those things are questionable. We don't necessarily know when they're going to come out or if they're going to come out and what the specs are going to be like there. All we know right now is that we have the A7R4 that's coming out, that's going to be shipping in September. And if the specs line up to what you need, then it's a good buy. If you have the A7R3, it might not necessarily be a good time to upgrade to the A7R4 unless you're just that person that has to have every upgrade, or maybe even your A7R3 is getting a little long in the tooth. Maybe you've been using it a lot and you fear it hitting end of life. Sometimes it is better to sell your camera before it does flat out hit end of life, because the A7 cameras typically have a pretty good resale value. You can sell the camera online even if half of its life is used and really only lose a couple $100 off of its retail price. And that's typically what I do, just so that I can always have top-notch camera equipment that's running well. I will sell my camera when it's reached about half of its life for, you know, maybe 4 or 5, depending on the camera, a couple $100 less even than what I paid for it new. Somebody else will get a long life out of the camera, and I can go ahead and just upgrade to the next version. But that's not for everyone. So those are my thoughts on the A7R4. I think that there's probably some other things that can be said about it, and there are some people that have gotten their hands on it already. I was not one of those fortunate people, but with that said, I am pre-ordering it, and I will get it in, and I will do my first shots video of it. So if you want to be notified when that comes out, make sure that you subscribe to the channel here. Make sure that you click the bell so that you get notifications when I put new videos out, because I will do my first shot video. If you want to see what one of those videos look like, I've done one on the A6400. I've also done one on the EOS R, the Canon EOS R, and also the Nikon Z6. And every camera that I get my hands on, I'm doing this type of video because I think it's just better to give examples. And when I have examples, I can put together a better case for the camera and give you better information. So with that said, let me know what you think down in the comment section. What do you think about the A7R4 so far based on all the information that we know? Is it something you're going to get, or are you going to hold off and choose something else, or even wait for something else? Let me know what you think down in the comment section. And remember that if you are going to pre-order, there's links in the description for you to do that. It helps support our channel here when you click those links, so make sure to do that. And I'll see you back here in the next one on Ditch Auto. Thanks so much.